Hello, today we're diving into one of the most sensitive and debated chapters in Czechoslovak history. Beneš Decrees and the expulsion of Germans, a deep dive into a controversial chapter of Czechoslovak history. Was this justice after years of Nazi occupation or collective punishment disguised as law? Welcome to the channel. If you're passionate about history that goes beyond textbooks, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. The end of World War II brought not only liberation to war-torn Europe, but also sweeping changes, retribution, and painful decisions. One of the most contentious and emotionally charged events in Central European history is the post-war expulsion of ethnic Germans from Czechoslovakia, legally and ideologically framed by a set of presidential decrees issued by Edvard Beneš. These decrees and the events surrounding them continue to provoke debate among historians, legal scholars, and the public. Were they an act of justice after years of oppression or a form of collective punishment with lasting consequences? Czechoslovakia was established in 1918 as a multi-ethnic state, home to Czechs, Slovaks, Germans, Hungarians, Jews, and others. The ethnic Germans, particularly those living in the Sudetenland, made up roughly 3 million of the population and often felt alienated in the new Czech-dominated republic. Tensions simmered throughout the interwar period, fueled by economic disparities and growing nationalist sentiments. The situation deteriorated further in the 1930s with the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany. Many Sudeten Germans began supporting Konrad Henlein's Sudeten German Party, which advocated for autonomy and closer ties to Germany. This culminated in the Munich Agreement of 1938, in which Britain and France, seeking to appease Hitler, allowed Nazi Germany to annex the Sudetenland. Czechoslovakia was dismembered without a fight, and many Czechs viewed the Sudeten Germans as traitors. Following the full occupation of Czechoslovakia by Nazi forces in 1939, the Sudetenland was incorporated into the Reich. The German minority enjoyed privileges under the occupation, while Czechs faced repression, forced labor, and mass executions. After 6 years of suffering, the end of the war in 1945 brought a wave of retribution. The general public and political leaders alike sought to remove the perceived threat of a fifth column within their borders. President Edvard Beneš, who led the Czechoslovak government in exile during the war, returned in 1945 with a clear goal: to re-establish the republic and ensure its national security. One of the tools at his disposal was a series of legal acts known as the Beneš Decrees. These decrees covered a range of post-war policies, including the reorganization of state authority, punishment of collaborators, land reform, and most notably, the removal of German and Hungarian minorities. The key decrees related to nationality and property included Decree No. 12, 1945, confiscation of agricultural property owned by Germans, Hungarians, traitors, and enemies of the state. Decree No. 33, 1945, revocation of Czechoslovak citizenship for persons of German and Hungarian ethnicity who had allegedly acted against the state. Decree No. 108, 1945, confiscation of industrial and commercial property of Germans and Hungarians. While these decrees provided a legal framework, they were often implemented with broad generalizations and without due process. Citizenship was revoked en masse, and property was seized before individuals could prove loyalty or innocence. The expulsion, wild and organized transfers. Between 1945 and 1947, an estimated 2.5 to 3 million ethnic Germans were expelled from Czechoslovakia. The process unfolded in 2 stages. The wild expulsions, May-August 1945, in the chaotic weeks after Germany's surrender, local militias, revolutionary guards, and even spontaneous mobs drove Germans from their homes, often violently. Thousands died from beatings, starvation, executions, or during forced marches. Some estimates put the death toll at over 20,000. The organized transfers, late 1945 to 1947. Following the Potsdam Conference, the Allied powers agreed to the transfer of German populations from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary in an orderly and humane manner. Though less chaotic than the earlier phase, the organized expulsions were still traumatic. Families were given limited time to pack, allowed minimal belongings, and often transported in harsh conditions. For many Czechs, the expulsions were seen as a necessary and justifiable response to betrayal and collaboration during the war. It was, in their eyes, the removal of a hostile minority that had actively supported Nazi occupation. For the expelled Germans, however, it meant loss of home, identity, and dignity. There are countless stories on both sides. Czech survivors of Nazi repression recount the fear and brutality they endured under German rule. Meanwhile, German families tell of being driven from homes their ancestors had lived in for centuries, of children dying during forced marches, and of neighbors turning into enemies overnight. While the Allied powers sanctioned the transfers, the morality and legality of the expulsions and the Beneš Decrees have been questioned ever since. Critics argue that the decrees violated principles of individual justice and amounted to ethnic cleansing. Supporters claim they were necessary security measures in the aftermath of one of history's most brutal wars. Germany has at times demanded compensation or an official repudiation of the decrees, while Czech leaders have insisted that they are part of the historical legal order and should not be revisited. The European Union has generally avoided the topic, though some members of the European Parliament have raised concerns about the ongoing symbolic and legal legacy of the decrees. The Beneš Decrees remain a deeply polarizing topic in Czech-German relations. Some Czech nationalists defend them as a justified act of post-war sovereignty, while others call for reconciliation and recognition of injustices. In Germany, particularly among expellee organizations, the issue remains sensitive and emotional. Efforts at reconciliation have included joint historical commissions, public apologies, and cultural exchanges. However, wounds remain, especially among families directly affected by the expulsions and property confiscations. The story of the Beneš Decrees and the expulsion of Germans is not one of clear heroes and villains. It is a story shaped by war, trauma, fear, and the human instinct for survival. As with many events in history, it resists simple categorization. Understanding this complex period requires empathy, open dialogue, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Only by acknowledging the full spectrum of experiences, Czech, German, Jewish, Hungarian, and others, can we begin to heal the historical wounds and learn from a past that still casts a shadow on Central Europe today. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive into one of the most controversial and painful chapters in Central European history. The Beneš Decrees and the post-war expulsions remain a topic full of complex emotions, historical trauma, and unresolved questions. What do you think? Were the decrees a necessary act of national protection or a step too far? Thank you for watching, and see you next time.